Good afternoon. My name is Clyde Elmore, and I'm with the University of California. I'm now retired. Today we're going to be talking about some use of plant materials in the landscape and what competition really is and how we can use competition for the management of invasive weeds and how this is affected in both the landscape area and particularly in the turf area as well, and we'll move to that a little bit later. But competition is basically what you and I do all the time, or plants do it all the time, and that's basically for competing for a single element in the environment. And this can be an element of light, it can be an element, say, of water, or in many cases nutrients. And the last thing probably is just space, having a place to live, if you will. So all of these things plants compete for, just like we would, say, in our own environment. Now, with plants, since they don't move around, we can actually use various sizes and locations of trees or shrubs, deciduous shrubs, and this one has gone dormant, still perennial. Or we can use shrubs that are evergreen, but they are also perennial, and they then, of course, will have a leaf canopy to capture light as it goes through, so very little of it actually hits the ground. From there, we can go to what we call ground covers. And these are plants that are very, very low, usually less than 6 to 8 inches to the ground. And if you'll notice on top, they're very compact and dense. But if you look underneath, there's virtually no light that actually reaches down into the soil. So the plant is really capturing all of that light, and it shades the soil so that we can suppress weeds just by the use of competition with these plants. Now, with a little bit larger plant, we have more of an open canopy so that it's interspersed with light, and so it may capture some of the light, but it's not totally shading the ground totally. Now, in this particular landscape, of course, it's irrigated, and since if we have irrigation, we don't normally look at competition in an irrigated site because there's usually more than adequate water. Now, if we were in a site that was non-irrigated, then we would have to be thinking about depth of rooting of the plant, shading of the plant, and trying to have water, say, only in the site where that particular plant is growing. So we can use plants for competition, and in many cases we can actually plant the right species to achieve the competition that we want, so that we can reduce the amount of weed pressure on the landscape. Well, let's move on to another site where we're going to look actually at turf grasses and how they then are competing in the landscape as well, either with themselves or with other plants. Well, as you can see, we've gotten into a very different environment. We've got into very low growing plants that are generally going to be kept quite low because we mow them. So in looking at turf, we see these various types of things around us. Some of them are brown. We have a darker green, and then we have a lighter green off over here as well. Now, these are different species, different turf types. Now, this brown, for example, is Bermuda grass, a perennial that has turned brown because it has gone dormant. It's still underneath very much alive, and in the spring, why, it will grow back and have a very good dense growth, and the grass is very competitive at that time. However, there's virtually no competition going on now. If we look off a little bit further out there, we have another lighter green colored grass, and that's probably the weed annual bluegrass, which again, it's an annual, but it's a winter annual, and therefore it competes well during this cooler, moist period of year. So the varieties or the species that we use in the turf can make a major difference as far as competition and how well they compete in the particular site in the turf as to whether there will be weeds present. But we also have to look at irrigation. We don't want to over-irrigate. If you have a very heavy soil, you want very little irrigation at a time so that it penetrates deep into the soil so that you don't have to irrigate on a daily basis and waste water. So the secret is basically to put on enough water, but water deeply and infrequently, so that we do have water throughout the total root zone, but we don't want to have it all run off, or we don't want to waste water. But here in this turf area, the roots may be 1 to 2 feet in depth at the most, so we're really looking at a fairly narrow area for them to draw all the nutrients and moisture they want. Well, another factor, of course, is fertility. We need to fertilize turf because grass is a very heavy user of nitrogen. So we have to use nitrogen. On heavy soils like this, the other elements needed normally is phosphorus, potassium, and some of the minor nutrients. These heavy soils have plenty of that in the soil already, and basically we don't have to add at this location. On sandier soils, that's not true. You would have to have more of the other nutrients to keep a very good fertility for turf grass. Okay, we also should look at mowing because all of our turf needs to be mowed. Usually, depending upon the location and the turf type, it may be as frequent as once a week, or it could in some cases be once every week and a half to 2 weeks. But we want only to take a certain portion of the leaf off, no more than 1/3 of the total leaf, so that that grass will grow in the most competitive manner. So we use all of these various practices then to make a tight, usually very consistent, uniform turf that it can compete with the weeds, so that new weedy species, whether it's grasses or broadleaves, cannot enter the turf area and have a new colony, if you will, of weeds.
In this segment on competition in both landscapes and turf, we discussed how plants compete for resources, particularly sunlight, water, and nutrients. And we looked at proper horticultural techniques that include irrigation, fertilization, mowing, and other strategies that can reduce weed infestations.
My name is Kasim Al-Khatib. I'm weed specialist with the University of California. We will talk today about weeds in home garden. We all face weed problems in our backyard. We can find two types of weeds in our backyard, grasses and broadleaf weeds. Grasses is something similar to corn or wheat, narrow leaf. Broadleaf, something similar to beans, peas, and tomatoes. Those are broadleaf plants. Now, these two types of plants, they grow in different ways, and each of them got annual and perennial plants. Annual plants that grow in one season from seed to seed. Perennial plants that got vegetative growing parts under the soil surface beside they produce seeds. Annual plants, something you don't like about them, they produce large number of seeds. You know, for example, pigweed plants. Each plant can produce between 250 to 400,000 seeds per plant. So if you have 4 plants in your backyard, you're stuck with 1 million of seeds that you need to get rid of them. And it's going to be difficult to manage a weed like this. So the first message today you learn from me that do not let weeds to go to seeds, because it can be a problem down the road.
In this topic, we discussed the 2 main life forms of weeds, including annuals that complete their life cycle in 1 year or less and reproduce only by seed, and perennials that live longer than 2 years and have vegetative reproductive strategies in addition to producing seeds.